One evening in April 2005, Raven Abaroa said he was out playing soccer when he returned to his family's North Carolina home to discover a horrifying scene. He told police he found his wife, 25-year-old Janet Abaroa, stabbed to death in an upstairs office. Nothing else in the house was disturbed, according to authorities, and the couple's 6-month-old son, Caden, was left unharmed in another room. Raven Abaroa told a 911 dispatcher at the time, "She's been shot or something. There's blood everywhere." Who killed Janet Abaroa was a mystery that captivated the Durham, North Carolina, suburbs, and the case remained unsolved for years. Janet Christensen, the 7th of 10 siblings, grew up in a Mormon family. She met Raven Abaroa, also a Mormon, in 1998 at Southern Virginia University, where she played soccer. He was a fellow soccer player who instantly swept her off her feet. She was beautiful, attractive. "I just felt so much comfort when I was with her," Raven Abaroa said in an interview in 2007. "And we started this journey of getting to know each other, and it was an amazing journey." In August 2000, after 2 years together, Janet and Raven Abaroa married at the Mormon Temple in Washington, D.C. They settled in southeastern Virginia. Her friends and family thought that life for the newlywed couple was perfect. Soon after their wedding, a job opportunity moved the couple to Durham, North Carolina, where they both took positions at a sporting goods company. Janet Abaroa's sisters told ABC News that at the time, the couple was beginning to have some marital problems. "The Abaroas welcome a son. He came to her one day because he wanted to be out of the marriage," said Sonja Flood, Janet Abaroa's sister, and explained to her that he had been cheating on her with several different people. And very soon after that, she found out that she was pregnant. It should have been the happiest time of Janet and Raven Abaroa's lives. But instead, Janet Abaroa confided in her family that she felt helpless. Her older sister, Dana Kendall, told 2020 that Janet didn't want to raise the baby as a single mother. But it seemed to friends and family that the young couple worked things out and welcomed their son Caden on October 17, 2004. He promised, swore up and down that he would no longer cheat on her, that she was the only one for him. He would make it work, Flood said. With the birth of their baby boy, the Abaroa's marriage seemed to be on the mend, until they suffered yet another blow. Raven Abaroa was caught stealing from the sports apparel company, where they both worked in December 2004. Mortified, Janet Abaroa resigned from her job. He eventually pleaded guilty to 5 charges of embezzlement, but would avoid serving any jail time. On April 26, 2005, Raven Abaroa said his wife had been getting ready for bed around 8 p.m. when he left to play soccer with friends, according to the account he gave police about that night. He said he returned home after 10 p.m. and found Janet Abaroa's body with multiple stab wounds. In a 911 call, Raven Abaroa told the operator, "My wife is dead. She's been shot. There's blood everywhere. She's not breathing." Although Abaroa said his wife had been shot, Durham police quickly realized that she had been stabbed. Shortly after his wife's death, Raven Abaroa moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, with their son. There, he eventually met Vanessa Pond, a single mother whose daughter was in the same day care program as Abaroa's son, Caden. Raven seemed very upfront, very honest and genuine, Vanessa Pond said. And I found out that he was a single father. And I really, really admired that. They started dating, and Pond told 2020 that Abaroa mentioned his wife had died. She said she felt so sorry for him and Caden. They decided to move in together. Pond went online to find out more about the death of Raven Abaroa's first wife. She told ABC News at the time she wasn't convinced Raven Abaroa was innocent. But after asking him questions, she said he removed any and every doubt from my mind. He had his stories about how people were trying to frame him, about how horrible the cops were. and how he continued to try to contact the police to find out what's going on," said Pond. In summer 2008, 3 years after Janet Abaroa's death was still unsolved, Pond and Raven Abaroa were married in the backyard of her parents' home. When Janet Abaroa's sisters learned he was engaged, they said they felt they had to reach out to his new fiancé. "We just wanted her to make sure she was aware of the things that had been in the news about him, that she would know what she was getting into, and that we were fearful for her," said Janet's sister, Dana Kendall. "I was heartbroken," Pond said. "I did not want to believe at all that he had done this." Not long after, Pond said Raven Abaroa began acting in ways she didn't understand. Within moments, he could switch. He could say the most horrible things, Pond said, and then moments later, he would apologize. The outbursts, Pond said, became physical. "He grabbed me from the door and threw me up against the wall, and then I fell," Pond said. Later, he tried to convince me that I had tripped. A new detective is assigned to Janet Abaroa's case. Just 4 months into their marriage, Pond said she feared for her safety. The couple separated and the marriage was annulled. Pond went public in spring 2009 with her fears that he killed his first wife. The Durham police assigned a new detective to Janet Abaroa's case, Sol. Raven never kept the lies straight, Sol told 2020. His statements to law enforcement initially, they were contradictory. Then, as he was reviewing the crime scene photos, Sol said something stuck out to him as odd. "I noticed the contact case on the counter with the top off of it, indicating to me that the likelihood that the contacts were probably not in there, which would be contrary to her going to bed. Or, as Raven said, in the bed going to sleep." Sol said, when police interviewed Janet Abaroa's family and friends, Sol said they told them Janet Abaroa was consistent with removing her contacts before going to sleep. He said he found this detail suspicious. Then the next thing, Sol said, is not seeing any disturbance based on the manner of her death. A stabbing, is not immediate. It's usually violent, with struggling, a disturbance. Raven Abaroa was arrested on February 1st, 2010, and charged with first-degree murder in the death of his first wife. In July 2010, Janet Abaroa's body was exhumed, and authorities determined that she had been wearing contacts when she was buried. "After I received these fragments and I then cleaned them, I think washed them with sterile water to get a better view," said Dr. Charles Zwirling, an ophthalmologist who examined the remains. "The material actually swelled from the water and resumed a convex shape typical of your contact lens. But the key finding was finding the numbers 1, 2, 3 on sample A. This was conclusive evidence that this was an AccuV contact lens. In order to demonstrate how a contact lens decays over a period of time, if it were buried with a body, Zwirling conducted a recreation using sets of pig eyes in 3 separate boxes. "I applied the contact lens," said Zwirling. "I applied a lens cap, which is done at your funeral home. I used the same solutions, even the same linen. And I got these little caskets, these wooden boxes. And I put the pig eyes in them and buried them actually in my backyard. And then, after 6 months, I exhumed the first box, and so forth. The final analysis showed that the contact lenses did change just like the one we discovered," he added. Apparently, this evidence was crucial in determining a flaw in Raven Abaroa's story. Raven Abaroa goes to trial and faces his second wife in court. During his trial, which began in 2013, prosecutors presented Raven Abaroa as a controlling husband. Pond, who testified as a witness for the prosecution, detailed how she saw Raven Abaroa become violent on the soccer field, and how his aggression turned on her. "When he sees weakness, he just comes at you harder and harder," Pond said in court. "He told me how much he hated me, and how much it didn't matter if I died." Abaroa's defense team argued that the prosecution's evidence against their client was mostly circumstantial, and police had ignored evidence, including a bloody shoe print, that they said could have pointed to a different killer. In May 2013, the jury failed to reach a verdict, deadlocking 11-1 on a guilty verdict, and the judge declared a mistrial. Before Raven Abaroa's second trial was supposed to begin in March 2014, he entered an Alford plea for voluntary manslaughter, acknowledging that there was evidence to convict him, but not admitting guilt. "I was shocked. But more than that, I was shocked at what the plea deal turned out to be," Pond said. "That's not justice at all. It's not justice." A judge sentenced him to between 95 and 123 months in jail, but he was granted credit for the 4 years he had spent behind bars before, and during his trial, which was applied as time served. Raven Abaroa did not testify at his trial, but he spoke in court in 2014 after being sentenced. "I would just like to state that I didn't receive a fair trial the first time. I don't think I'll receive a fair trial a second time," he told the court at the time. "I don't think it's worth risking the possibility of spending the rest of my life in prison for something I didn't do. I take this plea to ensure that doesn't happen, and that's the only reason. I didn't kill my wife." Abaroa, now 39, was released from prison on Christmas Day 2017. He now lives in Utah. What started out as a college romance ended in murder and mystery. Scott Peterson and Lassie Rocha met in 1994 while both were attending college at California Polytechnic State University. They married 2 years later. In 2002, Lassie became pregnant. The two lived in Modesto, California, and planned to raise their unborn son Connor there. Scott Peterson says that on Christmas Eve morning, he left his pregnant wife alone to go fishing about 90 miles away at the Berkeley Marina. He says that Lassie planned to walk the couple's dog, Mackenzie, and mop the kitchen floor. When Scott returned home hours later, he says he found Mackenzie there alone, still wearing a leash, but no sign of Lassie. That evening, Lassie's stepfather called the police to report her missing. Family, friends, and volunteers launched a huge search for Lassie Peterson. Scott Peterson was interviewed by police in the early hours of Christmas Day. Now retired Modesto police detective John Boeller says, "Scott didn't seem as interested as one would expect. Oftentimes, a victim who's left behind is firing tons of questions at us, and we didn't get any of that from him." Less than a week after Lassie Peterson went missing, Modesto detectives raced over to investigate an intriguing lead. A Fresno massage therapist named Amber Frey revealed that she had been dating Scott Peterson for over a month. She told police that Peterson had lied to her and said he was single. Former Detective Boiler notes, "Her recall was fantastic. It was almost like it was a script from a Hallmark TV show or something." Amber Frey recalled every detail of their romantic dates, down to what they were wearing, hoping for clues that might lead them to the missing woman. Detectives ask Frey to record phone calls between her and Scott Peterson, and she agrees. In an explosive press conference 1 month after Lassie Peterson goes missing, Amber Frey publicly reveals her affair with Scott Peterson. "I am very sorry for Lassie's family and the pain that this has caused them," she said. "And I pray for her safe return as well." Prior to Frey going public, Peterson had told her in a recorded call that he was in Paris when he was really in Modesto, while the search for Lassie was still on. Eventually, Scott admitted to her, "I've lied to you that I've been traveling." Those recorded calls would later become part of a damning case against Peterson. On April 13th and 14th, 2003, 2 bodies are found on the shores of the San Francisco Bay. They are later identified as Lassie Peterson and her unborn child. The 2 bodies were found about a mile apart. Authorities caught up with Scott Peterson on April 18th at a golf course in San Diego and arrested him. Authorities found a wad of cash, his brother's ID card, and multiple cell phones inside the vehicle. Days later, Peterson pleaded not guilty to 2 counts of capital murder. Scott Peterson's trial begins in San Mateo County, California, in June 2004. Because of massive publicity, the trial was moved from Modesto to Redwood City, in San Mateo County. The decision was made because the judge decided it would be difficult for Peterson to get a fair trial too close to home, where emotions were running high. In what many consider a major turning point of the trial, Amber Frey took the stand for the first time to tell the jury about her relationship with Scott Peterson, a secretly married man, and about all the lies he told her. Frey painted a picture of a dishonest man who could tell falsehoods with ease, hurting his credibility. Jurors heard the lies for themselves in those recorded phone calls Frey made. Scott Peterson was found guilty of first-degree murder for the death of his wife Lassie and second-degree murder for the death of his unborn son Connor. Crowds outside cheer. In March 2005, 4 months after his conviction, Scott Peterson is sentenced to death. At a press conference, juror number 7, Rochelle Nice, called Peterson a jerk and commented San Quentin is your new home, referring to the prison where he would serve his sentence. Nice was nicknamed Strawberry Shortcake during the trial because of her hair color. In August 2020, after 2 appeals, Scott Peterson's death sentence was overturned by the California Supreme Court after deciding that the original trial judge made a mistake when jurors were being picked for trial. The result of that mistake, Peterson's supporters say, was that the jury was stacked with pro-death penalty jurors. Peterson, shown here in 2018, will now receive a new trial for only the sentence phase. The court upheld his murder convictions. The California Supreme Court orders a lower court to re-examine Peterson's murder convictions and decide if he should get an entire new trial. Scott Peterson's supporters say it all comes down to the actions of that juror once nicknamed Strawberry Shortcake, Rochelle Nice, pictured here in 2005. During jury selection, prospective jurors filled out a questionnaire asking if they had in the past been in a lawsuit and if they had been crime victims. Nice checked no. It's pretty clear that she lied to us straight to our face about her own situation, Peterson's current attorney, Pat Harris, stated. In fact, Nice was involved in 2 domestic disputes in the past. But prosecutors say when Nice filled out that questionnaire, she didn't lie. She just didn't think her past experiences were relevant to the questions and didn't see herself as a victim. Now a lower court will consider if Peterson will get a complete retrial. In March 2021, CBS News' Jonathan Vigliotti interviewed Scott Peterson's sister-in-law, Janie Peterson, in her war room of evidence. She claims proves his innocence. She claims witnesses saw Lassie walking in the neighborhood near the Peterson home after the time Scott said he left for the fishing trip. If that's true, Scott couldn't have killed Lacey. Scott Peterson's attorney explains, "There's been a lot of criticism because we didn't call some witnesses who saw Lassie that day, and that the thought process at the time was that a number of the witnesses who saw her didn't have great memories or were contradicting each other." Retired Detective John Boiler says there are no witnesses who saw Lacey alive that morning. He says there were other young women in the neighborhood who were pregnant and looked similar to Lassie, and that it would be real easy for somebody to mistakenly see one of those 3 girls as being Lacey. Still, Janie Peterson insists that Scott is innocent. Perhaps more important to a new defense case is what Janie Peterson believes actually happened to Lassie. She points to a burglary she believes happened on the same day Lacey disappeared, right across the street from the Peterson home. Scott Peterson's supporters theorize that Lassie confronted the burglars, and that ended badly. But police quickly arrested the burglars, Stephen Todd and Donald Pierce, pictured here in a 2003 Modesto Police Department press release. Scott Peterson appeared in court remotely for a status hearing on a new death penalty trial. In December 2021, Scott Peterson is sentenced to life in prison without parole. Peterson and his supporters maintain the wrong man is in prison for Lacey and Connor's deaths. According to Detective Weller, well, I guess it's possible. But there's still people that believe the earth is flat too. On New Year's Day, 1991, fire emergency services were called to a residential fire in Murphys, California at 2:26 p.m. They were confronted by Karl Karlsen, who said he just rescued his 3 children from inside the burning home, but that someone else was still inside. He said he wasn't able to get inside to save his wife, Christina. First responders found Christina's body in the bathroom of the rundown house. Karl told officials that the fire may have started because of a utility light that had fallen. Fire officials determined that the origin of the fire was directly outside the bathroom. Christina had been taking a bath while Karl worked in the garage. Officials observed some red flags, according to John Clear, Lieutenant of Investigations, Seneca County Sheriff's Office. The window in the bathroom where Christina died was boarded up. The odor of kerosene was prominent. However, Karlsen told investigators they couldn't afford to fix the broken pane. He said that they used kerosene to heat the house, and that a container of it had spilled and seeped into the carpet days before the blaze. On its face, it looks like it could be an accident, said Clear. But when someone dies, the default is to consider it suspicious until you know better. The investigators weren't going to just accept that this was an accidental fire based upon Karl Karlsen's story, added former state trooper Jeff Arnold. An autopsy was performed the following day, while investigators looked for leads on the cause of the fire. The physician found soot in Christina's lungs, but no evidence indicating she was injured or incapacitated before the blaze. The autopsy determined Christina died from smoke inhalation. It didn't conclude if the death was an accident or a homicide. The day after the fire, Karlsen surprised Christina's family and authorities when he announced he was moving with his daughters, Erin and Katie, and son, Levi, to his hometown in Seneca County, New York. He didn't stay for any funeral services or purchase a headstone. He just packs up and leaves, said Clear. Christina's family was so suspicious, they decided to collect their own evidence. Despite their efforts, on March 3, 1991, Christina's death was officially ruled an accident. There just wasn't enough hard evidence to prove otherwise, said Moreland. State Farm Insurance paid a life insurance policy of approximately $215,000 to Karlsen. I've worked with insurance investigators, and if an arrest is not made, insurance policies are not going to deny the claim, explained Clear. Was that payout a motive for murder? Investigators considered that. Karlsen moved on and purchased a section of a farm from his parents. About a year later, he married Cindy Best. On November 20, 2008, 17 years after Christina's death, Cindy called 911. She frantically told the dispatcher that their truck had fallen off a jack. Levi, now 23 with a family of his own, was pinned underneath. He wasn't breathing. Officials found that Levi had a crushing compression type of wound to his chest. All indications showed that he had perished hours ago. According to Karlsen, Levi was working on the truck when he and Cindy left to go to a funeral. When they returned, he was crushed under the half-ton vehicle. The family doctor signed off on the death as accidental, according to investigators. There was no autopsy done. Christina's mother, Arlene Meltzer, heard the news about Levi. I felt really bad, but I didn't think it was an accident. I thought, it's happened again, she said. In February 2012, Clear received a call from Levi's cousin, Jackie Heimel, who asked if he had investigated Levi's death. She said, there's a good chance he was murdered by his father. Through conversations with Cindy, Heimel had heard things that had raised her suspicions. She talks about the fact that Karl had made money off of Christina's death, and that Christina's children had never seen any of that money, Moreland stated. Karlsen had taken out insurance policies on the lives of Christina and Levi shortly before their deaths. He was the beneficiary in both cases. Investigators reopened the case into Levi's death. On April 9, 2012, they called Cindy Karlsen, who was estranged from her husband. She agreed to cooperate and was interviewed numerous times over the following months. A profile of Karlsen emerged as a controlling and emotionally abusive narcissist. According to Cindy, Karlsen and his son had been at odds for quite a while, but appeared to be mending fences. Karlsen had been the one to convince Levi to get the $700,000 life insurance policy, which was taken out 17 days before Levi's death. Cindy said she didn't find out about it until after Levi was dead. Karl had pretty much blown most of the money on a get-rich-quick scheme, said Clear. Before separating from Karlsen, Cindy had a private investigator do some digging on her husband and learned Karlsen had taken out an insurance policy on her. Cindy agreed to wear a wire to catch Karlsen talking about his son's death. Although he didn't confess, Karlsen made an admission that enabled police to bring him in for questioning. Karlsen's version of the events before Levi's death were inconsistent. He initially said Levi had been crushed before going to his aunt's funeral. Karlsen then said he caused the truck to fall, freaked out, and left. "I don't believe it for a second that he accidentally dropped the truck on his son," said Clear. "But for legal purposes, it doesn't really matter. Under New York state law, that's depraved indifference. That's murder in the second degree." Karlsen was arrested for second-degree murder and insurance fraud. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 years. In a stroke of good luck, an investigator in California has preserved copies of all the records related to the death of Christina Karlsen. It had been determined that kerosene had been poured on the floor just before the fire was lit. On December 8, 2012, the Calaveras County District Attorney's Office officially reopened the investigation into her death. Karlsen's trial for her murder began in 2020, nearly 3 decades after her death. On February 3, 2020, a jury convicted him of first-degree murder. Karlsen was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In November 2022, Ashley Jones and her mother, Marcia Allen, allegedly put a nefarious plan into motion. According to police, the two women were plotting to kill Marcia's husband, Harold Allen, and they started conducting research on various poisons that would do the job. Their search reportedly led them to purchase foxglove seeds, which are highly toxic and can even be deadly when ingested. Marcia allegedly put these seeds in chili and brownies that she then fed to Harold, but when they only made him ill, the women switched directions. Court documents claim that they then ordered ethylene glycol, the chemical in antifreeze, and laced Harold's root beer float with it. Police initially had no suspicions of foul play surrounding Harold's death on December 20th, 2022. But 9 months later, on September 19th, 2023, that all changed. Then, Marcia called the police to report an attempted burglary in her home, the same home where her husband had died nearly a year earlier. 2 men were identified as suspects in the burglary, Nathaniel Napier and Stephen White. When police brought them in for questioning, however, White's story unexpectedly shed a new light on the death of Harold Allen. White told investigators that he and Napier had been asked to burglarize the home by none other than Ashley Jones. Even more shockingly, White informed police that Ashley had told him she and Marcia were responsible for poisoning Harold. Marcia Allen denied this when detectives spoke to her. She also consented to a search of her phone, which allegedly revealed a number of incriminating texts. In Marcia's cell phone, there were many text messages, beginning in November 2022, between Marcia and Ashley, in which the two discussed poisoning Harold, the court documents noted. Documents also state that Marcia had searched online queries such as what happens if you eat foxglove seeds, how much foxglove is fatal, and how long does foxglove take to kill you, just before texting Ashley to state that she wanted to purchase foxglove seeds. In late November, Harold Allen visited the hospital with complaints of numbness on one side of his face, a common sign of foxglove toxicity. Days later, he returned with even more symptoms of poisoning, including diarrhea, stomach pains, and vomiting. The foxglove was making Harold Allen sick, but it wasn't killing him. So, Ashley Jones and Marcia Allen allegedly decided to change strategies. They reportedly placed an order for ethylene glycol instead. Ethylene glycol is a colorless, odorless, sweet-tasting compound used in consumer products, including antifreeze. Ingestion of ethylene glycol can result in death in humans, court documents read. On December 19, 2022, police say Ashley Jones texted her mother, "The mail is here," to which Marcia Allen later responded, "He's all in for root beer floats." A day after this text exchange, Harold Allen died. Marcia texted Ashley at 7:55 a.m. on December 20th, asking her to come here, at which point she allegedly told her daughter that Harold was acting drunk and loopy. 5 hours later, Marcia called an ambulance, but Harold was already dead. Ashley Jones was arrested on October 3, 2023, on charges related to Harold's murder. A further search of her phone revealed that she had been texting Stephen White and bragging, "I planned it all." Jones also allegedly complained that her mother needed her help to get into a dead man's phone and get all his retirements and savings he had hidden. In the message, she claimed that she helped her mother take $4,500 from Allen's PayPal credit card before the company could learn of his death, and she was upset that she did not receive any of it. "I showed her how to scam it as him before they find he's gone. She's fake," she allegedly wrote. "She didn't give me anything out of that." On October 16th, police re-examined Marcia Allen's home and questioned her about her husband's death. She was found dead herself later that day. The investigation into Marcia's death is ongoing, but suicide is suspected, court documents state. Ashley Jones, meanwhile, faces charges for murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and consumer product tampering. Before his wife's murder in June 2009, Eli Weaver had numerous affairs with women he met through online dating sites, where he called himself an Amish stud. But only one mistress was willing to kill for him. From the outside, it may have seemed as if Barbara Weaver had a perfectly happy life as an Amish housewife. At 30 years old, she had been married to her husband Eli for 10 years, and they had 5 young children together in the picturesque, conservative community of Apple Creek, Ohio. But on June 2, 2009, Barbara was found shot to death in her own home, and everything pointed to Eli Weaver as the culprit. The Weavers belonged to a conservative subgroup of the Old Order Amish. Their religion didn't allow them to have cell phones, internet, or even to take photos of themselves. They traveled around town by horse and buggy, but as investigators dug into the Weavers' life, they found Eli didn't exactly adhere to those rules. Not only did he have a secret cell phone, he had several extramarital affairs with other women, most of whom he found in an online chat room where he called himself Amish Stud. Who wants to do an Amish guy? His profile read, "By all appearances, Barbara and Eli Weaver had a good marriage. They had a good community of friends and neighbors. Barbara was a very friendly, sociable person. She was kind of laid back, but super nice. A gentle soul," neighbor Mary Aker said in an interview. Eli was very outgoing. He would often come over fairly late in the evening and ask for a ride. And he was very considerate. He would apologize for interrupting me. He had charm. Mary was a Mennonite taxi driver, someone who would give rides to the Amish in her community to places they couldn't reach by horse and buggy. But in the later years of the Weavers' marriage, they began having problems. Eli was having several affairs, and he was withholding money from Barbara. Fanny Troyer, Barbara's sister, said Eli wouldn't even give her money to care for the children or buy groceries. Eli ran a gun store, and business was fine, she said. It wasn't about the money, it was about control. The Weaver children also reportedly saw Eli physically abuse Barbara, but she never reported it because, as one Amish leader said, she would have been asked, "What did you do that your husband would treat you like this?" Barbara was struggling with their marital problems. She wrote in a letter to her counselor, "Where did my friend love, trustworthy husband go to? He hates me to the core." Eli Weaver even left his family and the church twice to live as English. Both times, he was back within a few months, begging for forgiveness. Barbara Rubber was another Mennonite taxi driver in the Apple Creek community. Barbara and Eli met in 2003 when she was 33 and he was 23. They began having an affair. In the months leading up to the murder, Weaver had been asking several people to kill his wife. Most didn't take him seriously, but he said in his testimony that when he mentioned it to Barbara, she ran away with the idea. They began plotting the murder in the fall of 2008. Barbara performed 840 internet searches on poisoning, and investigators found a series of text messages between Weaver and Barbara discussing the murder method. "I thought if we could get that fly poison stuff in a spice cupcake, she might not detect it," reads a text message from Barbara. "Maybe you could blow up the house?" Eli texted Barbara. "What about your kids?" she asked. "The kids will go to heaven because they're innocent," Weaver wrote. In the end, they settled on using a gun. But why did Eli Weaver need to kill his wife? Why didn't he just leave her? "If he had left, he would have been shunned," said Andrew Hyde, Weaver's attorney. "If his wife is dead, they pat him on the back." Early in the morning, on June 2nd, 2009, one of the Weaver children found their mother dead and covered in blood in her bed and ran to the neighbor's house for help. Investigators found Barbara Weaver had been shot with a .410 shotgun. There was a pile of cash in the bedroom, indicating robbery was not the motive. When Barbara was found, Eli Weaver was fishing on Lake Erie with friends. He had left at 3 a.m., but neighbors and friends of the family pointed police in the direction of Barbara Rubber, who didn't have an alibi for the time of the murder. Barbara said she took a gun from her husband's gun cabinet and admitted to entering the Weaver home at 4:30 a.m. the day of the murder. She said she didn't remember loading the weapon and claimed she only meant to scare Barbara Weaver, but the gun was discharged accidentally. On June 10th, just over a week after Barbara Weaver's murder, Eli confessed to conspiring with Barbara Rubber to kill his wife. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder in exchange for his testimony against Rubber, who was charged with murder. The trial began in September 2009. Weaver testified that he and Rubber discussed the plan the day before the murder. He told her he would be leaving at 3 a.m. for a fishing trip, and the basement door would be left unlocked for her. Rubber recanted her previous story, saying she was never in the Weaver home. The murder weapon was never found, and Rubber's prints weren't in the house. Rubber's attorney argued that Eli Weaver was the one who killed Barbara, claiming he shot her before leaving for his fishing trip. But Weaver testified that he and Rubber met in his barn on June 9th. He said, Rubber described the murder in detail and told him she was sorry for everything. Weaver said, Rubber asked him how to clean a gun so it didn't look like it had been fired recently. With the help of Weaver's testimony, Rubber was convicted and sentenced to 23 years to life. Weaver was sentenced to 15 years to life as part of his plea deal. Weaver is eligible for parole next year, while Rubber won't be eligible for parole until 2032. In one of her last letters to her counselor, Barbara Weaver wrote, I often think of Christ's words, forgive him, for he knows not what he does. When police first answered a 911 call about an unresponsive man lying in his yard in Trenton, South Carolina, it seemed like a simple tragedy. Authorities found Joseph McKinnon dead of a heart attack. But then they also found the body of his girlfriend, Patricia Dent, in a nearby pit. McKinnon, police realized, had died while trying to bury his girlfriend's body. Evidence gathered at the scene, along with statements from witnesses, aided investigators to build a timeline, leading us to believe that Mr. McKinnon attacked Mrs. Dent while inside their home. Sheriff Jody Rowland and Coroner David Burnett of Edgefield County stated. Their statement added, Mr. McKinnon then bound her and wrapped her in trash bags before putting her in the previously dug pit. The pit was then partially filled in by Mr. McKinnon. While covering the pit, Mr. McKinnon had the cardiac event, causing his death. As Rowland stated, police swiftly determined that McKinnon had died of a heart attack when they arrived at the scene. There was no trauma to his body, and he seemed to have died of natural causes. However, he added, we had a hard time finding his significant other. After searching the home that McKinnon and Dent shared, police reached out to Dent's colleagues at the Mount Vintage Golf Club in North Augusta. Her co-workers said that Dent had uncharacteristically missed work that morning and that she hadn't responded to any messages. Police then searched the premises. After finding blood inside McKinnon and Dent's home, they returned to the garden where McKinnon had died while filling in a large pit. A neighbor had told police that McKinnon had dug the pit for a new water feature. But police found something else inside. We got down in the pit and started digging around, Rowland said. We uncovered it enough that we found black garbage bags. Inside the bags, police found the body of bound and bruised body of Patricia Dent. An autopsy confirmed what police had suspected. McKinnon had died of cardiac arrest. Dent had been strangled. Police believe that after hitting then choking Dent, McKinnon had bound her with tape, then wrapped her body in garbage bags. He brought it to their garden, where he suffered a heart attack as he tried to bury her. He was feverishly covering the pit, and so we just kind of put things together, Rowland stated. He attacked her, killed her, put her in the pit, and he died covering her up. Basically, Rowland added, this case is over. But the tragedy of Patricia Dent's murder has just started. Her twin sister described her devastation about Dent's death in a post on Facebook. My life is now forever changed, Pamela Briggs wrote. What am I going to do without her? I'm so broken. I loved my twin with my everything. Briggs added, I'm shocked. I didn't see any of this coming. Everybody who ever met her liked her. She was just full of energy and working at 65. I would say a nightmare, and I want to wake up. And it's a dream. I know it's not. This is reality and life. And a big part of me is gone. And now I'm going to have to live with that. Police noted that McKinnon and Dent had had no known history of domestic violence, and that police had never been called before to their Trenton residence before. Indeed, it seems that if Joseph McKinnon hadn't suffered a heart attack while burying Patricia Dent, his girlfriend may have simply vanished. Shanann Watts was facing health problems in 2010 when she met Chris. I was in a really bad place, and I got a friend request from Chris on Facebook. She said in an online video about 4 months before her death. I was like, oh, what the heck? I'm never going to meet him. Well, one thing led to another, and 8 years later, we have 2 kids. We live in Colorado, and he's the best thing that has ever happened to me. After the couple moved to Colorado, they started a family. Bella was born in December 2013. Shanann was so excited to have her first baby girl, her family wrote in her obituary, how she loved and cherished her. Less than 2 years later, in July 2015, Celeste was born. Oh, how Shanann was so excited to be able to have another child because of her battle with lupus, her family wrote. Every moment with her was a blessing. In 2018, Shanann became pregnant again with a baby boy she planned to name Nico. By all outward appearances, the couple's marriage was strong. However, in the summer of 2018, Shanann noticed that things had changed. He has changed. I don't know who he is. She texted a friend on August 7th. He hasn't touched me all week. kissed me, talked to me except for when I'm trying to figure out what is wrong. We've never had a problem in our relationship like this. I just want to cry." Shanann and the girls were last seen on Monday, August 13th, 2018. Chris Watts gave a series of stilted television interviews after their disappearance, pleading for their safe return. "We had an emotional conversation," he told Denver 7, a day after his family was reported missing. "She wasn't here. The kids weren't here. Nobody was here." On August 16th, Shanann's body was found on the property of Anadarko Petroleum Corporation, an oil and gas company where Chris had worked. Daughters Bella and Celeste were located later that day in oil tanks near Shanann's body. Shanann had been strangled, while the girls had been smothered, all with Chris' bare hands. Chris was arrested on 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of tampering with a body. While in police custody, Chris claimed that he told Shanann that he wanted to separate. He alleged that he went downstairs and noticed Shanann strangling Celeste, and that Bella's lifeless body was nearby. He ran upstairs in a rage, he claimed, and strangled Shanann. Cops didn't believe his story. "His story didn't match the evidence that we had," police stated at the time. "We believe that Chris killed them all." Authorities soon learned that Chris was having an affair with Nicole Kessinger, who worked at his company. After she learned about the murders, Kessinger cooperated with the police. Before coming forward, Kessinger appeared to worry about the public shaming that she might face. Did people hate Amber Frey? She typed into an internet search, invoking the name of the woman who was having an affair with infamous killer Scott Peterson, who murdered his wife, Lassie, and their unborn child in 2002. Kessinger told authorities that she believed that Watts was going through an amicable divorce. Hundreds of mourners assembled at Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Pinehurst, North Carolina, to pay their final respects to Shanann, her daughters, and her unborn son, Nico. "I always worried about her and the girls being so far because I couldn't protect them." Shannon's brother, Frankie R. Zukek, wrote in her eulogy. Zuzek didn't mention Chris Watts in his eulogy, but had previously lashed out at him, calling him a heartless psychopath and saying he stole my whole world. In a bombshell turn of events, on November 6, 2018, Watts pleaded guilty to the slayings of his pregnant wife and their young children in exchange for being spared a possible death sentence. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He had no choice, considering the evidence. It took time for him to come around, but he did. But not everyone was happy with the plea agreement. Watts' mother, Cindy, said in several interviews that she thought the confession and the plea were coerced. On November 19, 2018, Watts was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The defendant coldly and deliberately ended 4 lives, prosecutors said of Shanann, her girls, and her unborn child. During the victim impact statements, Shannon's father, Frank Zukek, repeatedly referred to Watts as a monster and an evil person. "I have no idea who gave you the right to take their lives," Shannon's mother, Sandra Zuzek, said. "But I know God and his mighty angels were there in that moment to bring them home to paradise." On March 7, 2019, a video of Chris Watts' full confession, which he'd provided to investigators in February, was made public. In the video, he told investigators from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation that on the night of the murders, he'd jumped on Shanann in bed. After he'd told her he didn't love her anymore, he claims she threatened to leave him and take the children. Then Watts drove 45 minutes to a remote oil field with Shanann's corpse in the bed of the truck and his still living girls in the back seat. Before burying Shanann in a shallow grave, Watts said he smothered Celeste in the back seat. After dumping Celeste's body in an old field, he returned to smother Bella, who begged for her life. As he went to kill her, Bella screamed, "Daddy, no!" And it was the last words she spoke. According to sources, Watts' life in jail is anything but stimulating. For an hour a day, he gets out of his cell for showers and exercise. He remains in the evaluation unit of the prison. In his cell, he's allowed to have a Bible, but not much more. With so much free time, Watts has spent a lot of time thinking about his past, says a friend of Watts. He's sad that everyone is hurting. He wishes he could go back in time. He wishes he had handled things differently. In July 2019, Chris Watts claimed in a chilling jailhouse letter to his mother that he was a changed man with a newfound relationship with God. His mother, Cindy Watts, was interviewed in the HLN special, Killer Dad, Chris Watts Speaks. During the show, she read the letter she received from her son. "I'm still a dad. I'm still a son. No matter what," Watts wrote. "Now, I can add servant of God to that mix. He has shown me peace, love, and forgiveness. And that's how I live every day." A 2020 Netflix documentary, titled American Murder: The Family Next Door, revealed the final text messages Shanann sent her husband. Finally on plane and about to take off, she wrote in her last text to Chris, "Thank God. Prayers for a safe flight. Love you." Chris did not respond. Watts had no criminal record or history of domestic violence before the murders, according to FBI agents, who also explained general warning signs to identify domestic violence. "This case shows that domestic violence can happen anywhere," Lee said. "It affects so many families, and sometimes the results can be deadly." John List appeared to be the perfect son, husband, and father. He worked hard as an accountant at a nearby bank to provide for his family. The New Jersey mansion he inhabited with his mother, wife, and 3 children had 19 rooms, including a ballroom, marble fireplaces, and a Tiffany skylight. List and his family were the embodiment of the American dream in 1965. They attended church every Sunday as devout Lutherans, and List taught Sunday school. Everything looked great on the surface, but almost nothing was as it seemed. In 1971, John List lost his job at the bank at age 46. Subsequent jobs didn't pan out. He couldn't bear to tell his family about the loss of income. So he spent his days at the train station, reading the newspaper and secretly skimming money from his mother's bank accounts to pay the mortgage. He refused to go on welfare, as it would entail excruciating embarrassment in the community and violate the principles of self-sufficiency that he learned at his father's knee. It's hard to believe the solution he arrived at would have been more acceptable to his father. But John List would later say it seemed to him the only option: the murder of his mother, wife, and children. One day in late 1971, John List shot and killed his wife, Helen, his 16-year-old daughter, Patricia, his 15-year-old son, John, his 13-year-old son, Frederick, and his mother, Alma, aged 85. They were shot methodically one by one. Helen was first. List saw the children off to school and then shot her in the kitchen as she sipped her customary morning coffee. Then he went up to the 3rd floor and murdered his mother in her bed. He killed Patricia when she returned home from school. Then the youngest son, Frederick. He made himself a sandwich, closed out his bank accounts, and cheered for his only surviving son, John, at his high school soccer game. He gave him a ride home, then shot him in the chest. John List laid the bodies of his family members on top of sleeping bags in the ballroom, then composed a note to his pastor, who he felt would understand. He feared his family, confronted with a world full of evil and poverty, would turn from God. This was the only way to ensure their safe arrival in heaven. He was not, however, willing to suffer the earthly consequences of his actions. In an effort to baffle the police, he cleaned the crime scenes and used scissors to remove his image from every photo in the mansion. He canceled all deliveries and contacted his children's schools to let their teachers know the family would be on vacation for a few weeks. He turned on the lights and the radio, leaving religious hymns playing in the house's empty rooms. He slept in the mansion where his family lay dead, then walked out the door the next morning and wasn't seen again for 18 years. A month passed before neighbors, curious about the constantly burning lights and empty windows, began to suspect something was wrong at the List mansion. When authorities entered the Westfield, New Jersey house on December 7, 1971, they heard organ music piped through the intercom system. They also found the 5-page note from John List explaining that the bloodied bodies on the ballroom floor were his family members, killed out of mercy. He had saved the souls of the people he loved. The FBI found his car parked at Kennedy International Airport in New York City, but they never found him. The trail went cold. Fast forward 18 years to 1989. New Jersey prosecutors had come up with a plan. They had an expert forensic artist, Frank Bender, create a physical bust of John List, as Bender imagined he might have aged. Bender gave him a hawk nose, grizzled eyebrows, and horn-rimmed glasses. Psychologists theorized that List would wear the same spectacles he wore as a younger man to remind him of more successful days. It was a masterful depiction of John List. When America's Most Wanted aired the story of the John List murders on May 21, 1989, an audience of 22 million saw Frank Bender's sculpture. Tips came pouring in. One tip came from a woman in Richmond, Virginia, who thought her next-door neighbor, Robert Clark, bore a striking resemblance to the bust. The tipster said her neighbor was also an accountant and attended church. Authorities went to Clark's home and spoke to his wife, whom he met at a church social gathering. Her story put an end to the 18-year-long mystery. It turned out that List had changed his identity and moved to Colorado under the assumed name Robert Clark. The alias worked, and he kept it when he moved to Richmond. Police in Virginia arrested mass murderer John List on June 1, 1989, a mere 9 days after America's Most Wanted aired his case. At his trial in 1990, defense lawyers argued that List suffered from PTSD from his military service in World War II and Korea. Expert psychologists believed rather that List was going through a midlife crisis, and as the prosecution pointed out, that was no excuse for killing 5 innocent people. The jury finally found John List guilty, and a judge sentenced him to 5 life terms in a New Jersey prison. In an interview with Connie Chung in 2002, List said he didn't kill himself after killing his own family, because he felt that would prevent him from getting to heaven. All List wanted was to reunite with his wife, mother, and children in the afterlife, where he believed there would be no pain or suffering. John List died in prison in 2008 at age 82. The mansion in New Jersey where John List lived with his family burned down several months after the murders. Authorities never found the cause of the fire, and a new house was built on the property years later. The memory of the murders still haunts Westfield residents. In an interview in 2008, parents told a reporter in New Jersey that children will not walk past that property, nor do they even want to live on the same street. But who can blame them? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to stay tuned with the latest uploads.